My name is Eleanor Finch, and for the first 23 years of my life, I was a ghost. A shadow that trailed behind my younger sister, Rosamund, whose brilliance and beauty was so blinding they left no light for anyone else. Our family had one hope, one singular, all-consuming ambition for the London season. That Rosamund, the diamond of the first water, would secure a marriage to the wealthiest, most eligible bachelor in all of England, the Duke of Alastair. They never imagined, not in their wildest dreams, that at the season's final glittering ball, the Duke would walk past awaiting Rosamund, straight to me, the plain, invisible sister, and ask for my hand in front of all of high society. They never imagined their greatest hope would be realized by the daughter they never truly saw. Before I dive into the story of how that one shocking moment changed not just my life, but the entire foundation of my family, I'd love to know where you all are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, go ahead and hit that like button, because I have a feeling you'll understand this journey. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe to join our community of storytellers and survivors. We're glad to have you here. What would you do if the world suddenly saw the person you'd been all along, while your family was still looking right through you? It's a question I had to answer in the most public way imaginable, and it all began in a house where my worth was measured only by my utility to the family's grand project, the magnificent Rosamund. Growing up, the currency of our household was beauty, and Rosamund was wealthier than a queen. I, on the other hand, was solvent in sense, but bankrupt in charm. Our lives were a study in contrasts, painted from our earliest days. I remember our shared 10th and 8th birthday celebration. It was a modest affair, as all our affairs were, but our parents had scraped together enough for 2 new dresses and a small gathering. Rosamund's dress was a confection of pale blue silk, with tiny embroidered rosebuds that matched the flush in her cheeks. When she descended the stairs, a hush fell over our few guests, followed by a chorus of coos and exclamations. My mother, Lady Anne, clasped her hands to her chest, her eyes gleaming with a proprietary pride. "Is she not a vision?" she would murmur, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Rosamund would perform a perfect little curtsy, her golden curls bouncing, and the room would erupt in applause as if she had just solved a complex political treaty. My dress was a serviceable brown muslin, practical, sensible, words that would follow me like a stray dog my entire life. My great-aunt had sent me a gift, a leather-bound copy of philosophical essays by Marcus Aurelius. I was thrilled. The scent of the old paper, the weight of the book in my hands, it felt like a key to a world far beyond our slightly damp drawing room. When I showed it to my mother, she'd glanced at it with a flicker of disinterest. "Oh, how studious, Eleanor. Do be careful not to get dust on the furniture." Later I overheard her telling my father, Sir Reginald, "I do worry about Eleanor. Books are fine for a governess, but what man wants a wife who prefers dusty old Romans to a lively waltz?" My father, a man whose primary concerns were the thinning of his hair and the thickness of his debts, had simply grunted in agreement. "She has your good sense, son. Rosamund has your beauty. We must play the cards we are dealt." For them, my good sense was not a winning card. It was the one you held in reserve, the one that managed the household accounts and ensured Rosamund's lace was always perfectly mended. This dynamic solidified as we grew. Rosamund was cultivated like a prize rose, taught to sing, to play the pianoforte passably, to paint watercolors, and to deploy a smile with the strategic precision of a general. I, meanwhile, cultivated the household. I learned to negotiate with the butcher for better cuts of meat, to turn a worn-out dress into something passable for another season, to manage the paltry allowance our father gave us with the skill of a seasoned financier. Our family, the Finches, were what was politely called gentry of a certain age, which meant we had a title that was a century old and debts that were growing by the day. Sir Reginald clung to the name, but the fortune that once propped it up had dwindled to almost nothing. Our London house was rented, our country estate mortgaged to the hilt. The unspoken truth, the oppressive atmosphere that hung in our home heavier than the London fog, was that our only salvation lay in a brilliant match. And Rosamund was the chosen sacrifice, though to her, it seemed more like a coronation. The London season was not, for our family, a delightful social whirl. It was a campaign. Every shilling was allocated to Project Rosamund. Her wardrobe, her invitations, the flowers she carried, all were debated with the gravity of a war council. My role was that of quartermaster. Eleanor, can we afford the French lace? It would look exquisite on Rosamund's ball gown. My mother would ask, holding up a sample. And I would have to be the one to say, no, Mama, but the Belgian lace is nearly as fine and a third of the price. A sigh of disappointment would be my only reply. I was the purveyor of limits, the voice of sober reality in a house built on gilded dreams. Rosamund herself was not cruel. Cruelty requires imagination, and Rosamund's imagination was entirely occupied by herself. She was simply, profoundly, a product of her environment. She believed, as she had been taught, that her beauty was a gift to the world, and her primary duty was to bestow it upon the most deserving, i.e., the wealthiest and most titled suitor. She saw my quiet diligence not as a contribution, but as my natural state. I was the sensible sister. Of course I managed the accounts. Of course I stayed in the background. What else was I for? We loved each other, I suppose, in the way that two people who have shared a nursery and a childhood must. But our worlds were orbits around different suns. Hers was the glittering ballroom. Mine was the quiet, orderly study. She moved towards the light, and I, by necessity, arranged the lamps for her. Then came the news that sent a shockwave through the drawing rooms of Mayfair and a jolt of desperate, frantic energy through our home. The Duke of Alastair was returning to London for the season. Alastair was a name spoken in tones of awe. He was not just a duke, he was the Duke. Impossibly wealthy, with estates that sprawled across 3 counties, a lineage that traced back to the Normans, and most tantalizingly, he was unmarried, just shy of 30, and said to be as handsome as he was reclusive. He had inherited the title young and spent years abroad, managing his vast fortune and avoiding the grasping machinations of high society. His return was like the arrival of a mythical beast, and every mother with a marriageable daughter was sharpening her metaphorical spears. For my mother, this was not an opportunity. It was destiny. Rosamund, she declared, her eyes feverish with ambition, this is the man you were born to marry. From that moment on, our household was a blur of activity centered on a single goal. Lessons with the dance master were doubled. A new couturier was engaged, on credit we could not afford. Rosamund was drilled on the Duke's known interests, ancient history, it was rumored, and horses. She spent a week trying to memorize the names of Roman emperors, scrunching up her perfect nose in frustration. Tacitus, Titus, Tiberius. They all sound the same. Why can he not be interested in fashion? She'd pout, and my mother would soothe her. Hush, my love. You need only be charming. Your smile is worth more than all the history in the British Museum. My own tasks multiplied. I was dispatched to haggle with the milliner, to charm the butler into extending our credit, to write polite, carefully worded letters to secure invitations to the most exclusive events. I was the invisible engine powering the beautiful ship that was my sister. And through it all, I felt a familiar weary ache. It wasn't jealousy of Rosamund. I had no desire to be paraded and inspected like a prize filly. It was something deeper. It was the profound invisibility, the quiet erasure of my own personhood. I was not Eleanor. I was Rosamund's sister. A useful, plain, necessary accessory. There was one person who saw me differently. The Dowager Countess of Pembroke, a formidable old woman with eyes as sharp as her wit, had been a dear friend of my grandmother. She was one of the few grande dames of the ton who valued intellect over titles, and she had always shown me a quiet kindness. She would invite me for tea without Rosamund and my mother, and we would speak for hours about books and politics. "You have your grandmother's mind, child," she told me once, tapping my hand with her bony finger. "Do not let this frivolous world convince you it is a flaw. A sharp mind is a woman's best defense, and her most attractive quality, to a man of any substance." I had cherished her words, but in the context of my life, they felt like a fairy tale. Substance was in short supply in the London marriage market. The first major ball of the season arrived, the one where the Duke was expected to make his first appearance. The air in our house was thick with tension. Rosamund was a masterpiece of artifice and nature. Her gown a cloud of ivory silk, her golden hair intricately dressed, her cheeks flushed with a perfect maidenly blush. My mother fussed over her, adjusting a curl, straightening a ribbon, her hands trembling slightly. Remember to laugh at his jests, but not too loudly. Appear interested but not desperate. And for heaven's sake, Rosamund, do not mention the emperors. Sir Reginald stood by, looking slightly less anxious than usual, as if the sheer perfection of his younger daughter might magically clear his debts. I stood by the door, holding Rosamund's wrap, dressed in a simple grey silk that was meant to blend into the damask wallpaper. My mother gave me a final, critical look. "Eleanor, please try to remain discreet. Stand near the chaperones. Your role tonight is to support your sister. Nothing more." The ballroom at Lady Danbury's was a crush of jewels, perfume, and ambition. It was overwhelming, a cacophony of string music and shrill laughter. Rosamund was immediately swallowed by a sea of admirers, her dance card filled within minutes. I did as I was told, finding a quiet alcove near the library, partially hidden by a large potted fern. From there, I could observe the spectacle without being a part of it. I watched as the Duke of Alastair made his entrance. The whispers followed him like a wave. He was tall, with dark hair and a serious, almost severe expression. He moved with an athletic grace, but his eyes, a startlingly intense blue, swept over the room with an air of profound boredom. He was polite, bowing to the hostesses, exchanging a few words with the hopeful mothers, but he looked like a man trapped in a cage. I saw the moment Rosamund was presented to him. She executed her curtsy perfectly. She deployed the smile. He bowed, his expression unreadable. I was too far away to hear their words, but I could read the pantomime. Rosamund's practiced charm, her fluttering fan, her bright, eager expression. The Duke's cool, courteous stillness. He looked, for all the world, like a man listening to a tedious but necessary report. After a few minutes, he excused himself with another perfect remote bow, leaving Rosamund looking slightly nonplussed for the first time in her life. She was quickly surrounded again, but I could see the tiny crack in her composure. Seeking air, I slipped through a side door onto a small stone balcony overlooking the gardens. The cool night air was a relief after the stifling heat of the ballroom. I leaned against the balustrade, closing my eyes for a moment, just breathing. I see I am not the only one escaping the fray. The voice was deep and resonant, startlingly close. My eyes flew open. The Duke of Alastair was standing at the other end of the balcony, leaning against the wall, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand. I felt a hot flush of panic. I was not supposed to be here. I was not supposed to be speaking to him. I was supposed to be invisible. I dropped into a hasty curtsy. "Your Grace, forgive me. I was just taking a moment. Please do not apologize for seeking refuge." I was beginning to think I was the only sane person in the building, he said. There was a faint, ironic curl to his lips, but his eyes were weary. He looked at me, truly looked, and I felt a strange sensation of being seen for the first time all evening. "You are Eleanor Finch, Your Grace," I said quietly. "Miss Rosamund Finch is my sister." "Ah yes, the incomparable," he said, and the title sounded faintly mocking on his lips. He gestured to the ballroom, from which the strains of a waltz were now spilling. "Do you enjoy this sort of thing, Miss Finch?" I hesitated. The correct answer was a demure yes. But something in his direct gaze, his obvious disdain for the charade, prompted a flicker of honesty. "I confess, Your Grace, I find the noise rather overwhelming. And the conversation somewhat repetitive." A genuine smile touched his lips, transforming his severe face. "Repetitive is a generous term. I have been asked about my horses 6 times and complimented on the cut of my coat 4. I believe one young lady was preparing to quiz me on the Punic Wars before her mother dragged her away. I couldn't help but smile back. You must have a great love for history, Your Grace. My sister has been studying the Roman emperors with great diligence on your account. The words were out before I could stop them. It was a disloyal, terrible thing to say, exposing the mechanics of my family's plot. A look of profound understanding crossed his face, mingled with something like sympathy. I see. And you, Miss Eleanor Finch? Which emperors do you study? I prefer the philosophers to the emperors, I admitted. I find their concerns more timeless. A stoic, he murmured, his blue eyes studying me with an unnerving intensity. A rare find in a ballroom. Tell me, what would Seneca make of all this? And so, on a cold stone balcony, hidden from the glittering throng, I found myself in the most unexpected conversation of my life. We did not speak of fashion or gossip or the weather. We spoke of books, of architecture, of the ethics of power. He was not just handsome and titled. He was fiercely intelligent, with a quick, inquisitive mind that challenged and engaged my own. I forgot I was the plain sister. I forgot I was supposed to be invisible. For 15 minutes, I was simply a person speaking to another person. It was intoxicating. When he escorted me back to the ballroom doors, he took my hand and bowed. It was not the perfunctory gesture he'd given the others. His eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of the bored duke was gone. "Thank you, Miss Finch," he said, his voice low. "You have saved me from an evening of crushing tedium." I returned to my fern-shrouded alcove, my heart hammering in my chest. Later that night, as we rode home in the carriage, my mother was incandescent with fury. Not at Rosamond, who was preening about how many compliments she'd received, but at me. One of her society friends had seen me on the balcony with the Duke. "What were you thinking, Eleanor?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper so the driver wouldn't hear. "Your one task was to be unobtrusive. Instead, you monopolized the Duke's time." He probably felt cornered, forced to make polite conversation with the drab little sister out of pity. "You could have ruined everything." He seemed to be enjoying himself. I began but was cut off. "Do not be absurd," she snapped. "A man like that is not enjoyed, he is impressed. And he is impressed by beauty and charm, not by whatever dry nonsense you were spouting. You are to support your sister, Eleanor, not to compete with her. As if you could." The words landed like stones in my stomach. As if you could. It was the core belief of my entire family, distilled into one brutal phrase. I was not in the race. I was not even a spectator. I was a piece of the scenery. I stared out the carriage window at the darkened London streets, the brief, exhilarating warmth of my conversation with the Duke extinguished by the familiar icy chill of my mother's disdain. And I believed her. Course I did. It was, after all, the only thing I had ever been taught. The days following the ball fell into a strange new pattern. To my family, the Duke's brief conversation with me was an anomaly, a fluke to be forgotten. They doubled down on their efforts for Rosamond, convinced that a bit more exposure would secure his attention. They arranged for her to ride in the park at the fashionable hour, dressed in a fetching new habit. They secured an invitation to a small, exclusive musical evening where Rosamond was to sing. Yet, at every turn, the Duke of Alastair seemed to subvert their plans with a quiet, deliberate precision that was maddening to my mother and utterly baffling to Rosamond. At the ride in Hyde Park, Rosamond looked radiant on a spirited white mare. The Duke, as expected, was also there, mounted on a magnificent black stallion. He tipped his hat to Rosamond, his expression polite as ever. But then his eyes scanned the crowd and found me, standing beside the carriage with a book in my hand, waiting for my sister's triumphant return. He dismounted and walked over, leading his horse. "Miss Finch," he said, his voice carrying easily over the chatter. "I see you have brought your own entertainment. Is it Seneca again?" I felt 100 pairs of eyes turn towards us. My mother, from her seat in the carriage, looked apoplectic. "No, Your Grace," I managed, my cheeks burning. "It is a collection of poetry. Keats. Ah, a thing of beauty is a joy forever," he quoted softly, his eyes twinkling. "A sentiment much in evidence today." He glanced pointedly at Rosamond, who was now being circled by other hopeful young men, then his gaze returned to me. "But I find his odes on melancholy more interesting. Do you not? The idea that sadness and beauty are inextricably linked." For the next 10 minutes, under the curious gaze of the Tun, we discussed poetry while Rosamond rode aimlessly back and forth, her perfect smile looking increasingly strained. When he finally took his leave, he bowed to me with the same focused intensity as before, giving my mother and sister a brief, collective nod as he departed. The ride home was a silent, simmering affair. A few days later, we attended a tour of the British Museum, a cultural outing deemed a perfect opportunity for Rosamond to display her newfound knowledge of antiquity. She had been armed with a few pre-rehearsed comments about the Elgin marbles. But the Duke, upon spotting our party, bypassed the Greek sculptures entirely and found me in the quieter Roman Britain exhibit, where I was examining a display of ancient coins. "A denarius from the reign of Hadrian," he said, coming to stand beside me. "A fascinating period. An emperor who was a scholar and an architect as much as a soldier." He spoke to me of Hadrian's Wall, of the vastness of the empire, his voice filled with genuine passion. Rosamond, trailing behind with my mother, was left to stare blankly at a display of pottery shards, her carefully prepared remarks now useless. The whispers began to grow. It was a peculiar situation, and society, which abhorred a vacuum of information, rushed to fill it with speculation. Was the Duke eccentric? Was he using the plain sister as a go-between, a way to learn more about the beautiful one without appearing too eager? This was the theory my mother seized upon, a lifeline in a sea of confusion. "He is clearly trying to get to know our family," she declared one evening. "Eleanor, you must use these opportunities. When he speaks to you, you must praise Rosamond. Tell him of her gentle nature, her kind heart. You are in a unique position to help your sister." The request was deeply, profoundly humiliating. She was asking me to be a proxy, to use the one genuine connection I had ever made as a tool for my sister's advancement. "Mama," I started, "I do not think that is his intention." "And what would you know of a man's intentions?" she retorted, her voice sharp. "You are a child. I am your mother, and I am telling you what must be done for the good of this family. Do not be selfish, Eleanor." Rosamond, who was present for this exchange, chimed in, her lower lip trembling slightly. "He is so strange, Eleanor. He never compliments my dress. He just asks these odd questions. Perhaps if you told him how much I admire his horses, he would be more forthcoming." The innocence of her self-absorption was almost more painful than my mother's calculated ambition. She truly could not conceive of a world that did not revolve around her. My internal world was a tempest. A part of me, the part conditioned by a lifetime of being second best, insisted my family was right. This was some elaborate, incomprehensible courtship ritual aimed at Rosamond. My conversations with the Duke were a fluke, an amusing diversion for him. To believe otherwise was to invite catastrophic heartbreak. And yet, there was the way he looked at me. The way his eyes lit up when I countered one of his arguments with one of my own. The quiet respect in his voice. No man had ever looked at me like that, as if my thoughts were more interesting than my face. It was a dangerous, addictive poison. I tried to follow my mother's instructions. At a garden party a week later, the Duke found me near a rosebush, where I was admiring a particularly deep crimson bloom. "The Alastair Gardens have a similar variety," he began, "though I believe our soil produces a richer color." My heart pounded. This was my chance to be the good, dutiful daughter. "Rosamond has a great talent for watercolor," I said, my voice sounding stilted and unnatural even to my own ears. "She painted the roses in our own garden just last week. Her work is truly lovely." The Duke's expression did not change, but a cool stillness entered his eyes. "I am sure it is," he said politely. "But I was asking for your opinion on the color, Miss Finch. Not your sister's." The gentle rebuke was more cutting than any harsh word. He saw exactly what I was doing. He saw my mother's machinations, and he was not impressed. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. In trying to please my family, I had insulted his intelligence and betrayed the very quality he seemed to admire in me: my honesty. The rest of our conversation was stilted, and he excused himself far more quickly than usual. I felt as though I had failed a critical test. The Dowager Countess of Pembroke summoned me for tea the next day. Her drawing room was a sanctuary of calm and good sense. "The whole of London is talking," she said, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "They say the Duke of Alastair is either mad or a Machiavellian genius. They cannot decide which." She poured the tea, her movements precise. "And what do you say, Eleanor?" "I say I am confused," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Nonsense," she said briskly. "You are not confused. You are frightened. There is a difference. Your mother and sister are confused. They are trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and they are blaming the peg for not fitting. You, my dear, are afraid to believe what is right in front of your eyes." She leaned forward. "A man like Alastair, who has had beauty and flattery thrown at him since he was in short coats, does not value it. It is common currency to him. Wit, intelligence, integrity. Those are the rare jewels. He has found a diamond in the rough, and you are doing your very best to convince him you are just a lump of coal." Her words were a bracing tonic. "My mother says I am being selfish, that I am ruining Rosamund's chances." "Rosamund never had a chance," the Countess said, not unkindly. "She was never what he was looking for. The question is not what your mother wants, or what is best for Rosamund. The question, Eleanor, is what do you want?" It was a question no one had ever asked me. I had no answer for it. The breaking point came a week before the season's final ball. A footman in the Alastair livery arrived at our door. He bore a flat, rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. Our mother, seeing the ducal crest, immediately snatched it. "It is for Rosamund," she cried, her face alight with triumph. "He has sent her a gift. This is it." She tore at the wrapping, with Rosamund and Sir Reginald crowding around her. I stood back, a familiar feeling of resignation settling over me. Inside was not jewelry, nor a painted fan. It was a book, a beautiful, rare edition of metaphysical poetry, bound in dark green leather. My mother stared at it, bewildered. Poetry! What an odd gift. Rosamund took the book and opened the cover. Inside on the flyleaf was a card. Her face fell. "It is not for me," she said, her voice flat. She handed the book to my mother. Lady Anne read the card, her expression slowly shifting from triumph to confusion, and then to pure, unadulterated fury. She looked up, and her eyes, cold and hard as chips of ice, pinned me to the wall. "This is addressed to Miss Eleanor Finch," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. She thrust the book at me. I took it, my hands trembling. Inside, the card read in the Duke's strong, clear hand. Asterisk, Miss Finch, I believe you will appreciate these arguments more than Seneca. Your servant, Alastair. Asterisk, it was a reference to our very first conversation. It was personal. It was deliberate. It was undeniable. The silence in the room was broken by a choked sob from Rosamund. "He sent her a gift," she wailed, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. "In front of everyone. He means to make a fool of me. He has made a fool of all of us," my mother shrieked, turning on me. "This is your doing. You with your sly, conniving ways. I knew you were encouraging him. You have schemed behind our backs. You have deliberately sabotaged your own sister." "I have done nothing," I cried, clutching the book to my chest like a shield. "I have only ever spoken to him when he has approached me." "You are a serpent," she accused, her face contorted with rage. "A plain, jealous little serpent. You knew this family's entire future depended on Rosamund making a good match, and you have destroyed it out of pure spite. That is not true. Mama, she is right, Rosamund wept, her accusations tumbling out between sobs. She is jealous of me. She has always been jealous because I am beautiful and she is not. She wants me to fail. She wants me to be miserable. It was a nightmare. The two of them, my mother and my sister, their faces twisted with anger and betrayal, screaming accusations at me that were so far from the truth they were absurd. My father, typically useless in any domestic crisis, simply wrung his hands and muttered, Now, let's not be hasty. My mother advanced on me. You will put a stop to this, Eleanor. Do you hear me? You will write to the Duke, and you will explain that you are not interested in his attentions. You will tell him you are leaving London for your health. You will do whatever it takes to end this mortifying spectacle. The final ball is next week. That is Rosamund's last chance, and you will not ruin it. You have a duty to this family. I stared at her, at the raw, desperate ambition in her eyes. I looked at my weeping sister, whose sorrow was not for a lost love, but for a lost prize. I looked at my feckless father, who was already calculating the financial cost of this disaster. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been dormant and quiet for 23 years, began to harden. It was not courage, not yet. It was a cold, clear, and profound disillusionment. The Dowager Countess's question echoed in my mind. What do you want? I still did not have the answer. But for the first time in my life, I knew with absolute certainty what I did not want. I did not want to be a sacrifice on the altar of my family's ambition. I looked at the book in my hands, the tangible proof of one person's esteem, and held it tighter. I did not say a word. I simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving their shouts and sobs behind me. The week leading up to the Duke of Alastair's grand ball, the final event of the season, was the longest of my life. My home became a hostile territory, a cold war fought with slammed doors and icy silences. My mother refused to speak to me directly, instead issuing commands through a terrified housemaid. Rosamund remained locked in her room, emerging only for meals where she would fix me with a tragic, wounded stare before dissolving into tears. My father alternated between pleading with me to be reasonable and avoiding me altogether. They were all waiting for me to capitulate, to write the letter of refusal, to feign a sudden illness and retreat to the country. They expected me to erase myself, as I had always done. And I almost did. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat. The belief in my own plainness, my own unworthiness, was a lesson learned at my mother's knee, and it was a difficult one to unlearn. What if they were right? What if the Duke was merely amusing himself with me? The thought of being the subject of his pity, of being a temporary diversion before he turned to a more suitable choice, was a mortification I could barely contemplate. To hope for more seemed like the height of foolishness, a direct path to unimaginable humiliation. My nights were sleepless, my mind a battlefield between the ingrained habits of self-effacement and the fragile, burgeoning seed of hope the Duke's attention had planted. I would read and reread the inscription in the book he gave me, tracing the letters of his name, searching for proof that I was not deluding myself. 2 days before the ball, the Dowager Countess of Pembroke paid a call. My mother was forced to receive her, her face a mask of strained civility. The Countess, with the unerring social instinct of a predator, immediately requested a private word with me. We sat in the small, neglected conservatory at the back of the house. "You look like a soldier heading into battle without her armor," she said bluntly. "Your family is putting you through the ringer, I take it." I simply nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Eleanor," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "I have known Arthur, the Duke, since he was a boy. His father was an old friend. He is a serious man. He does not play games. He has spent the last decade watching the most beautiful women in Europe throw themselves at him. He is immune to it. He is, however, starved for an equal, for a mind that can meet his, for a woman of substance who is not performing for him." She reached out and patted my hand. He is not amusing himself with you, child. He is courting you. The only question is whether you will have the courage to let him." Her words were a lifeline. It was one thing to hope, but it was another to have that hope validated by someone so worldly, so astute. It was not enough to banish my fear, but it was enough to hold it at bay. "I am afraid," I whispered. "Of course you are," she said. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. Go to the ball, Eleanor. Hold your head high. Let him see that you are not a frightened mouse to be cowed by your family's theatrics." The night of the ball arrived. The atmosphere in the house was thick with a funereal gloom. The grand plan had gone awry, and I was the saboteur. Yet they had not given up entirely. Rosamund was to make one last spectacular effort. She descended the stairs in a gown of shimmering gold tissue, a dress that must have cost my father a quarter of his annual income. She was breathtaking, a gilded goddess, her beauty sharpened by a new, tragic air of fragility. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. I, by contrast, had chosen my attire with deliberate quietness. A simple gown of deep midnight blue velvet. It was elegant, well-made, but utterly unadorned. It was a dress designed not to be noticed. My mother gave me a look of pure contempt. "At least you have the sense to dress for the shadows," she said under her breath as we waited for the carriage. "Stay out of the way, Eleanor. Do not cause another scene." The Duke's London residence was a palace. A river of carriages flowed towards a brightly lit facade that seemed to occupy an entire city block. The ballroom was even more magnificent than Lady Danbury's, a cavern of marble, gold leaf, and crystal chandeliers that rained light down upon the assembled aristocracy of England. The air buzzed with an electric sense of anticipation. This was the night. The night the great prize, the Duke of Alastair, would surely make his choice known. The prevailing rumor, despite his attentions to me, was still that he would ultimately propose to the most beautiful debutante of the season. It was the only outcome that made sense to them. Rosamund was, therefore, the center of attention, the focal point of 1,000 whispers and speculative glances. My family made their entrance. Rosamund, on our father's arm, was the picture of nervous triumph. My mother followed, her head held high, a general leading her final charge. I trailed behind them, a dark, quiet footnote to their grand entrance. I saw the Duke standing near the orchestra, speaking with an elderly gentleman. He looked up as we were announced. His eyes, those intense blue eyes, scanned our party. They passed over my father, my mother, and even over the radiant Rosamund. They found me standing in the back, and for a single heart-stopping moment, he held my gaze. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a private acknowledgement in a sea of public faces. It sent a jolt of warmth through my veins, a tiny spark of courage in the vast emptiness of my fear. The first waltz was announced. This was the moment. Tradition dictated that the host would open the dancing, and all of society held its breath, waiting to see which lady he would honor. My mother subtly nudged Rosamund forward, positioning her in the Duke's direct line of sight. Rosamund, bless her, adopted a look of demure anticipation, her hand slightly, hopefully raised. The crowd parted, creating a path between the Duke and my sister. It felt like a tableau from a play. The prize, the victor, and the inevitable union. The Duke of Alastair began to walk. He moved with that same unhurried, deliberate grace I had come to know. He walked towards our family. My mother's face was alight with pure, unadulterated triumph. Rosamund's lips curved into a nascent smile. He drew closer. He was almost upon them. And then he walked right past her. He did not slow his pace. He did not even glance at her. He walked past a stunned and statuesque Rosamund, whose hand was still slightly extended, past my mother, whose triumphant expression had frozen and was beginning to crumble into disbelief. He walked past them all and stopped directly in front of me. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. It was not a whisper. It was a single unified sound of shock. The music faltered for a second before starting up again. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, a physical weight. I stood frozen, my heart feeling as if it had stopped beating entirely. The Duke of Alastair bowed, a deep, formal, and utterly respectful bow. "Miss Eleanor," he said, his voice clear and calm, yet carrying in the sudden ringing silence. "May I have the honor of this dance?" Could not speak. I could only nod, my head feeling disconnected from my body. He took my hand, his grip warm and firm, and led me onto the vast, empty expanse of the dance floor. As he put his hand on my waist and we began to move to the music, I felt as if I were in a dream. We were the only two people in the world, surrounded by a silent, watching universe. I risked a glance over his shoulder. Rosamund was standing stock-still, her face a mask of chalky white shock. My mother looked as if she had been struck by lightning. "Are you all right, Eleanor?" the Duke murmured, his voice for my ears alone. He had never used my first name before. "I am not sure," I breathed. "Forgive me for the theatrics," he said, his eyes full of a sincere regret. But I could not bear another moment of the charade, and I wanted to ensure there was no room for misunderstanding. He guided me expertly through the steps of the waltz, his lead so confident that my feet moved without any conscious thought. I wanted to dance with the woman I admire, not the woman I am expected to admire. "They will be furious," I whispered, thinking of my family. "Let them be," he said simply. "Their anger is not your concern. Your opinion is the only one that matters to me." As we danced, he spoke not of the weather or the music, but of us. He spoke of our first meeting on the balcony, of our conversations about books and philosophy. "From the moment you told me you preferred Seneca to emperors," he said with a small smile, "I knew you were different. You have never once tried to flatter me. You have only ever been yourself. Do you have any idea how rare, how precious that is?" The waltz ended, but the world remained suspended. The music stopped. The other dancers, who had tentatively begun to fill the floor, kept a wide circle around us. The entire ballroom was silent, watching, waiting. The Duke did not release my hand. He did not lead me from the floor. Instead, he held my hand tighter, turned to face the vast, astonished crowd, and raised his voice. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen," he began, his voice ringing with authority. "For this entire season, you have speculated on my intentions. You have watched and you have whispered. You have assumed that what a man in my position seeks is a decorative title holder, a beautiful jewel to adorn his name." He paused, letting the words sink in. The silence was absolute. "You are mistaken. I seek a partner. I seek a woman of intellect, of integrity, of honor. A woman whose character is as strong as her heart is true." He then turned back to me, his gaze so intense it seemed to burn away the rest of the world. And then, in front of the entire glittering, gasping beau monde, the impossibly wealthy, powerful, and sought-after Duke of Alastair went down on one knee. A woman near my mother actually screamed. He held my hand in both of his blue eyes looking up at me, filled with an emotion so raw and genuine it took my breath away. "Eleanor Finch," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "you have captivated my mind and my heart from the moment we met. You are the most remarkable, intelligent, and authentic woman I have ever known. I do not want to face another day without your counsel, your wit, and your presence by my side. Will you do me the profound and unimaginable honor of becoming my wife? Will you be my duchess?" Tears were streaming down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of shock, of release, of a joy so overwhelming it felt like pain. I looked from his earnest, hopeful face out to the sea of stunned onlookers. I saw my mother, her hand covering her mouth, her face a ghastly shade of pale. I saw Rosamund, her beautiful face a tragic mask of public humiliation, tears tracking through her carefully applied powder. I saw my father, looking utterly, completely lost. And in that moment, their reactions meant nothing to me. They were figures in a distant landscape. The only thing that was real was the man kneeling at my feet, offering me not just a title or a fortune, but his respect, his admiration, his heart. I found my voice, and though it trembled, it was clear. "Yes," I said. "Yes. Of course, yes." A cheer erupted from a corner of the room led, I later learned, by the Dowager Countess of Pembroke, who was beaming like a proud grandmother. The Duke slid a magnificent diamond ring onto my finger, a ring he had evidently carried with him, so certain was he of his own heart, if not of my answer. He rose to his feet and, ignoring the buzzing chaos that was now erupting around us, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me, there in the center of the ballroom, sealing our promise in front of the entire world. The social order of the London season had not just been shaken, it had been shattered, and I, the quiet, plain, invisible sister, was standing at the epicenter. The moments after my acceptance were a blur of noise and motion. The Duke, Arthur, I would have to start thinking of him as Arthur, gently but firmly steered me out of the main ballroom, through a throng of gaping, whispering guests who parted before us like the Red Sea. The Dowager Countess intercepted us near the door, her face split by a triumphant grin. "Well done, you two," she declared, patting Arthur's arm. "Caused more of a stir than the French Revolution. I haven't had this much fun in years." She squeezed my hand. "I knew you had it in you, child." She was the first to congratulate us, and her immediate vocal approval sent a clear signal to the rest of the ton. This was not a scandal, this was a coup. Arthur led me to a quiet, book-lined study, closing the heavy oak doors behind us, shutting out the cacophony. The sudden silence was a relief. I stood in the middle of the room, still trembling, staring down at the impossibly large diamond on my finger. It winked in the firelight, a solid, tangible proof that the last half hour had not been a fever dream. "Are you truly all right?" Arthur asked, his voice gentle. He came to stand before me, taking my hands in his. "I know that was a great deal to endure. I am sorry if I caused you distress." Distress? I looked up at him, a watery, incredulous smile touching my lips. "No. I think I have just been pulled from the bottom of the ocean. I am still learning how to breathe this air." "Then breathe deep," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "This is your air now. Our air." He saw the worry that still lingered in my eyes. "Your family," he began, his tone careful. "They will be displeased," I said, the understatement of the century. "We will face them tomorrow," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Together. You will not do it alone. I will not allow you to be bullied or berated for accepting my proposal. This is my choice, and they will respect it. And they will respect you." The word "together" was a balm on a wound I hadn't realized was so deep. For my entire life, I had faced my family's expectations and disappointments alone. The idea of having an ally, a partner, was so new and so powerful it brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. He simply held my hands and waited for them to pass, offering a quiet, unshakable strength that was more comforting than any words could be. Meanwhile, back in the ballroom, the Finch family had imploded. As we learned later from the Dowager Countess's gleeful report, my mother had nearly fainted, requiring smelling salts and a glass of brandy. Rosamund, after standing frozen for a full minute, had let out a choked sob and fled the ballroom, her golden gown trailing behind her like a banner of defeat. It was the most dramatic exit of the season. Sir Reginald, my poor father, was left standing alone in the middle of the floor, a bewildered shipwreck of a man, as the sharks of society began to circle, their whispers turning from shocked to pitying and then to mocking. The family's grand ambition had not only failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular and public fashion imaginable. They had become a cautionary tale overnight. The next morning, as promised, Arthur arrived at our rented house in his ducal carriage. The sight of it parked outside our modest door sent a fresh wave of panic through the household. He escorted me inside, his presence so solid and calm beside me that I felt my own spine straighten. We were shown into the drawing room, where my family was assembled like defendants at a tribunal. The mood was glacial. My mother sat ramrod straight on the sofa, her face pale and pinched. Rosamund was beside her, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, refusing to look at me. My father paced nervously by the fireplace. My mother spoke first, addressing Arthur as if I were not in the room. "Your Grace," she began, her voice brittle. "I am certain there has been some dreadful misunderstanding. A confusion brought on by the excitement of the evening. Eleanor is a quiet girl, very bookish. She is not suited. I am sure, upon reflection, you will see that it is Rosamond who—" "There has been no misunderstanding, Lady Anne," Arthur interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying the cold weight of command. "And I would thank you not to speak of my fiancée as if she were a piece of furniture. My proposal to Eleanor was the most deliberate and considered act of my life. I love her. I intend to marry her. That is final." The finality in his tone sucked the air from the room. My mother's jaw snapped shut. Rosamond let out another watery sob. My father, seeing the ducal fortune slipping away if he did not change tactics, scurried forward. "Your Grace. Eleanor. Of course. A surprise to be sure, but a delightful one. We are overjoyed. Overjoyed for you both." His attempt at enthusiasm was so transparently false it was pathetic. He was already trying to salvage the connection, to pivot from Rosamond to me without missing a beat. Arthur gave him a cool, unimpressed look before turning his attention to me, a silent question in his eyes. He was giving me the floor. This was my moment. I took a deep breath. The fear was still there, a familiar tremor in my hands. But for the first time it was smaller than my resolve. "Mama, Papa, Rosamond," I began, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. "For my entire life, I have lived in the role you assigned to me. Plain one. The sensible one. The one whose only purpose was to support Rosamond's ambitions." I looked directly at my mother. "You told me I could not compete. You were right. I had no interest in the competition you created. You were measuring the wrong things." I turned to my sister. "Rosamond, I have never been jealous of you. I have been saddened by you. Saddened that you were taught to believe your face was your only asset. I never tried to sabotage you. I only failed to erase myself completely, and for that I will not apologize." Finally I looked at them all. "Your love, your approval, it was always conditional. It was dependent on my utility, on my silence. I spent 23 years trying to earn it. I'm done. Arthur's proposal does not give me worth. It recognizes the worth that was there all along. A worth none of you ever cared to see." I paused, letting my words hang in the dead air. "From now on, our relationship, if we are to have one, will be on new terms. It will be based on respect. Respect for me as a person and respect for my choices. I will need time and space. The wedding will be planned from Alastair House. I will send for my things." I had never spoken to them like that. The shock on their faces was absolute. My mother looked as if I had slapped her. Rosamond simply stared, her mouth agape. My father had stopped his nervous pacing and seemed to have shrunk into his coat. I'd taken back my own story. With Arthur's hand resting supportively on the small of my back, I turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and into the beginning of my own life. A year can change everything. A year after that tumultuous night, I was no longer Eleanor Finch, the shadow sister. I was Eleanor, the Duchess of Alastair, and I had never felt more myself. Life at Alastair Castle, a magnificent, sprawling estate in the heart of the countryside, was not a life of idle luxury. It was a life of purpose. Arthur was true to his word. He had not sought a jewel, but a partner. My mind, so long dismissed as a liability in the marriage market, was now my greatest asset. I immersed myself in the management of the vast estates, discovering a surprising aptitude for it. My years of managing our household's meager budget had given me a sharp eye for economy and efficiency that Arthur, who had always dealt in massive sums, found invaluable. Together, we established a school for the children on the estate and modernized the tenant farms. My passion for books found a new home in the Duke's library, one of the most extensive private collections in England. But I was not content to simply read. With Arthur's encouragement, I began hosting salons, not the frivolous, gossipy affairs of London, but gatherings of thinkers, artists, scientists, and politicians. Our home became a hub of intellectual life, a place where a person's wit was more celebrated than their title, and a woman's opinion was sought and respected. I had found my voice, and to my astonishment, people wanted to listen. I had blossomed not by changing who I was, but by finally being planted in soil where I was allowed to grow. My family, as expected, tried to capitalize on my new status. My mother's letters began arriving, full of fawning compliments and unsubtle hints about her mounting debts or the social advantages I could provide. They were clumsy, transparent attempts to re-establish a connection she had personally severed. Arthur and I maintained a polite but firm distance. We provided a modest annuity for my parents, enough to live comfortably and save them from ruin, but we did not allow them to become fixtures in our life. The access they craved, the ability to boast about their connection to the Duke, was denied them. Their change of heart was so clearly motivated by my new title that it was almost pitiful. They had not learned to value me, only to value my position. Rosamund's fate was more complex. Her season had ended in disaster. Being so publicly and spectacularly jilted by the Duke had made her an object of pity and a bit of a laughingstock. The premier suitors moved on, and she ended the following year by accepting a proposal from a minor baronet, a man with a handsome face, a decent amount of charm, and very little money or sense. It was a far cry from the ducal coronet she had been promised. About a year after my wedding, she came to visit me at the castle, alone. It was the first time we had seen each other since that awful morning in the drawing room. She was changed. The brilliant, confident sheen had worn off, replaced by a more subdued, uncertain quality. She was still beautiful, but there was a weariness in her eyes. We had tea in the gardens. The conversation stilted at first. Then, haltingly, she began to speak. "My husband, he enjoys the cards," she said, staring into her teacup. "And the races. He tells me not to worry my pretty little head about it." She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw genuine, unadulterated pain in her eyes. "He likes my face, Eleanor. But he has no interest in my thoughts. It is very lonely." In that moment, all the old resentment I held for her dissolved, replaced by a profound and aching pity. She was living the very life our mother had trained her for, and she was discovering its hollowness. "I am sorry, Rosamund," I said, and I meant it. "Truly." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You were the lucky one," she whispered. "All this time I thought it was me. But it was you." It was not a full apology, not a complete reckoning with the past, but it was a beginning. It was an acknowledgement. From that day on, a fragile bridge began to form between us. I knew we could never go back to the simple closeness of childhood, but perhaps we could build something new, something truer, as women who had both, in our own ways, been victims of our upbringing. My life now is full and rich, filled with love, respect, and intellectual challenge. Arthur and I are not just husband and wife. We are the closest of friends, partners in every sense of the word. Looking back, I realized that being underestimated, being relegated to the shadows, was a strange and unexpected gift. It forced me to cultivate an inner life, to build a sense of self that was not reliant on outside approval. The world and my family saw me as plain and unremarkable, so they left me alone to become something more. My value was never determined by the Duke's proposal on that ballroom floor. His proposal was simply the moment the rest of the world was forced to see the value that had been there all along. So that is my story. It's a story about how the world's perception of you is a cage only if you let it be. My family looked at me and saw a plain, serviceable sparrow, while they looked at my sister and saw an exotic bird of paradise. They never realized that sparrows have wings to fly just as high, and they are masters of survival. In the end, it's not the flashiness of your feathers that matters, but the strength of your wings and the courage to chart your own course. I want to thank you all for listening to my journey today. It's not always easy to share these moments, but it's important. Have you ever been put in a box by the people who were supposed to love you most? Have you ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are? I would be honored if you would share your own stories and thoughts in the comments below. Reading them reminds us all that we are not alone. If my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and finding your own voice. And remember to share this with anyone you think might need to hear that their worth is not up for debate. Thank you again for joining me. I wish you all the strength to be seen, not for what others expect you to be, but for the remarkable person you already are.